Welcome back to this week's episode of Mystery Garage. In today's episode, it is episode 7 on the Jetta VR6 swap. In today's episode, we test. Let's jump into it. Welcome back to today's episode. Now, if you've been watching this Jetta from the get-go, you'll recognize that today is episode 7 of this VR6 swap. Now, when we first received the car, it came to us as a 1.6 liter turbo diesel, for which we pulled the engine out, power washed the engine bay, we slapped in the new O2A shifter, we dealt with the clutch, we mocked up the engine, put in the cooling system, did all that kind of stuff. We matched up the exhaust. We then put in a Mark III fuel tank because since it was a diesel, it had an water fuel separator. We had to pull that out. We pulled out the old tank. We then put in a Mark III tank with fuel pump, fuel filter and lines, all from a Mark III. And then we jumped into brake upgrades, steering rack upgrades, because when it did come to us, it was power steering. Power steering was looped. So we had to go ahead and put in a fresh rack, fresh lines, get all that set up. We have done a ton of work, not to mention wiring and everything required with the VR6 swap. But today is the day that we finally test. So before we test, I'm gonna do a quick walk around the car, kind of point out everything I've done to catch you guys up on the build, and then hopefully we'll fire it up, give you guys a cold start, and we'll take it out on a rip. Let's jump right into it. So here it is in all of its glory. And guys, I need to be honest with you, this thing turned out fantastic. Almost better than I anticipated. All in all, a super clean install. It came out really, really nice. Did as much wire tucking as possible to keep the bay pretty simple. We're retaining things like heater core and all that sort of stuff, so cleaning up the hosing is a little bit difficult to do when you're keeping all of that stuff, but this install came out fantastic. This is a AAA VR6 2.8 liter O2A transmission, O2A shift box. We have the Fabulous Manufacturing Mark II clutch conversion, hydraulic clutch conversion, which is installed underneath the dash. All the wiring is factory Mark III stuff that I cleaned up and plugged into the back of the fuse box plug and play because it is CE2 in this car already. There's a ton of little things you want to look after. I'll show you in the car. The owner decided to go with Mark III clocks, so we'll show you that later, but everything functions as it should. The interior is nice and cleaned up. The engine bay, again, like I said, came out really, really nice. In this situation, I did use the Mark III cooling system, so it is all factory stuff, more or less. And then just did a little bit of bay cleanup. I did hide the ECU inside of the car, so we tucked it in just in the corner. You can't even really see it. Again, keep it out of the moisture, keep it out of the rain tray as well, just to keep everything nice and clean. But guys, here it is. So again, overall VR6 engine swap. We have 11-inch Corrado front brakes. We connected the exhaust system. We hooked up the hydraulic clutch. And sorry, bear with me, guys, there's trucks in the background. O2A shifter, Mark III fuel tank, which highly recommend that conversion if you have a Mark II because of those Mark II first and second pumps. Everything works as if it was a Mark II tank. But ultimately, you go from 2 pumps down to 1 pump, and you don't have that leaky box issue, which happens with most fuel pumps in a Mark II. Overall, super clean, really love it. Did have the owner, full disclosure, I did have the owner come by a couple days ago, and we ended up doing a full walk through the car. I explained everything to him. We talked about what parts were left over from the original car, things like drive shaft and the old fuel tank and a bunch of spares, so we went home with a lot of that stuff, the old brakes as well, that kind of thing. And we actually took the car on a very short trip just to the gas station, put in some fresh fuel, filled the tank, came back, and we actually realized once we got back, because it wasn't that far of a drive, that it had heated up, the fan hadn't came on yet. So left the car with me. We kind of picked the day he was going to pick it up, which is actually tomorrow, so we're going to take it for a rip real quick before he comes and gets it. And ended up figuring out it was just a wiring issue that I hadn't figured out. I hadn't put power to the temperature sensor, so I did that, and everything functioned as it should. other little issues, you know, clutch bleed again, like I mentioned in last episode. Clutch bled one more time, brake bled one more time. A friend of mine actually lent me a power bleeder, so it made it a lot easier. Everything right now is basically functioning as it should. Power steering works perfectly. At first there was a bit of cavitation because it wasn't sucking it in, so eventually it sucked in the fluid and everything worked perfectly. Didn't run it too long until that point happened, but overall, other than getting a little hotter than I would have liked, that was pretty much the only issue there. And the other thing I ran into is when you do a Mark III cluster, like is in this car, you do have to separately hook up the turn signals. So turn signal indicators in the cluster. So you have to wire that in, so I did that yesterday. What else? Again, overall, this car turned out awesome. Engine placements, a lot of people ask those kinds of questions. We get perfect hood clearance, so that's not an issue. We're actually able to retain, this is the turbo diesel under hood padding that keeps the noise of the turbo diesel down. We're actually going to keep that because we don't run into any interference issues. It'll just keep engine noise down, like overall engine bay racket. You still get lots of throaty wookie, so that's not really an issue. The exhaust note on this car is awesome. So again, just the little things, trying to keep everything, all the factory clips I did use on the install, all the proper factory bolts. Nothing is hokey at all in this install. Everything came out, like I said, the way I really wanted it to, and I'm super proud of this build. Like I said, guys, you can follow along on the build through each step. Granted, there are some things that I did off camera, like some of the wiring stuff. It would have been super tedious to do every little bit of wiring on the camera. Certain little things like some of the fills, some of the bleeds, a lot of those sort of things I did off camera. But ultimately, you guys watched pretty much all of it if you followed along. And today is the day we finally get to test. So let's start it off with turning the key and getting a cold start. You guys will see that everything works as it should. Tack works, fuel gauge works. Again, this is the Mark III cluster. Turn the lights on, full function. We actually ended up getting a cluster that only has 28,000 kilometers on it, which is pretty awesome. So a low-K car. I've actually only put a little less than the 5 kilometers of just to the gas tank or gas station and back. Again, like I said, when we returned back, fuel stop, it was just warm enough that the fans should have came on, but they weren't currently on. So like I said, I jumped into that. Again, those are little problems you guys are going to find when you go into builds like that, but up until this point, we've had 0 leaks. Knock on wood, I don't want to talk too soon. 0 leaks, 0 issues. The car runs and idles pretty good. I've only taken it on the 1 test trip, so we're going to go ahead and take the very first maiden voyage, other than the fuel stop, together. I'll get you guys in the car, but I'm just going to pull it out right now and let it warm up. Unfortunately, it is raining outside, so we're going to have some rain to deal with on the first drive, but ultimately it's been raining for weeks straight here, so there's not much we can do about that. So let me pull it outside and we'll let it warm up. I'll get you guys set up in the car with me and we'll go for a cruise. I can't be too hard on this car because it still has braking oil on it, so it's just kind of a slow up to speed, that sort of thing. We're not going to do anything too crazy in today's drive, but the owner is picking it up tomorrow, so I do want to make sure I give it a little bit of a decent shakedown to make sure it's ready for the trek home for him. And he's going to go ahead and put on the first break-in miles, and then we're going to do an oil change. I don't know if he's going to do it or he's going to bring it back to me, and then it'll be set for a cruiser after that point. Now remember, when you guys do builds like this, you ultimately do have things that are going to need work down the road. A lot of this stuff is used, especially if you guys build a car from a lot of, from a car that you might have stripped or used as a donor vehicle. A lot of that stuff you're going to have to make a decision: am I buying that part new while I do the swap, or am I going to hope that the part I'm using from the donor car will last? A lot of that stuff can nickel and dime you, so keep that in mind. A lot of people do choose to do a lot of the changeover to new parts while doing the swap. since they're in there, they're going to go ahead and do it. But at some point, there does need to be some line that you draw in the sand that, you know, I'm just going to use this, and this part used, and I'm going to use this, and this part new, and hope that this is going to work out for the long run. So down the road, this car may have minor issues and stuff like that, but right now, everything seems to be flawless. I'm very happy with how this car turned out. Let's go ahead, bring it outside, warm it up, and take you guys for a rip.
Fuck with these red guys, dripping on and she baptized. Taking her back by her ass, I think she in love with my cat size. Put it on like bad vibes, been giving up cash. Don't get a hobby, count on these racks in my pastime. Grab back on me, take a trip, female, I don't trust
too hard, but we'll get into it a little bit here. Really nice. Man, this is making me want a Mark II driving videos is just because this is really something you guys got to feel. I mean, this car is just so good. There's something about it. You know, it's just, when you get that VR6 Wookiees and you just get on it, it's just something about it. I mean, this car overall is a really, really good driver, and I apologize going between you guys and the road, but this car is just all around Mark II VR6, Mark 1 VR6, highly, highly recommend. You know, people talk about, sorry it's raining so hard, it might be hard to hear me, but people talk about weight distribution and all, power to weight ratio isn't as good, it's like a 180 or something. It's really hard to compare the torque and the sound of a VR6. I mean, there's something about it. It pulls hard, consistent. Its power level is, you know, obviously its torque range is pretty much right through where you want it to be. You know, granted a 180, which we're going to be doing on this channel in the future, definitely is a good motor. I'm not downplaying it at all. All I'm saying is that when it comes to, you know, to bottom end torque and just the Wookiee grunt of a VR6, it's hard to beat. And your power on a 180 ultimately is a little bit more in the top end range, whereas something like this, you're going to get power right through, and it's just so good. It's just such a good sounding motor. And in this car, it drives so nice. It's an awesome little package, and overall, like I said, I can't say it enough, just a great, great car. All right, we're back. Already straightened out the steering wheel. That was an absolute must. It was driving me nuts the entire drive, but overall, what a wicked drive. Can't wait to have the owner have this car back. He's gonna have such a smile on his face. And how good did that sound? Come on. This thing is awesome. But it is fully ready to go. So let's recap the build real quick. And how do you recap a build like this? And sorry guys, I closed the garage door just to keep the rain noise and the truck noise out. But ultimately, how do you recap a build that you put your blood, sweat, and tears into? And let's be honest, this kind of stuff isn't easy. It's not for everybody. But probably the most common question I get asked is, what would it cost me to VR6 swap my car? And I'm sure Christian Smith or Jake Rawson, Mark III, Mark II respectively, and myself being a Mark 1 guy despite this Mark II, what does it cost? What would it cost me to do my VR6 swap? And generally speaking, I say between $5,000 and $10,000. That may seem like a lot of money up front, but ultimately there's so many variations, so many variables that might take it. Can I swap my car for less than $5,000? Yeah, absolutely. If you found a donor car, a 98, 97 GTI that had a VR6 in it, can you swap 90% of its guts into your car if you got that car for $1,000? Yeah, you sure could. But there is variations between, you know, what's required with a Mark 1, what's required with a Mark II versus what's required with a Mark 3. If you got a Mark 3 donor, obviously everything bolts right in. If you got a Mark 2 donor, I would say 85 to 90% of that stuff will bolt right into this car. As far as what goes into Mark 1, again, probably more like 60% of that stuff will bolt into a Mark 1. So there's also so many factors from the reliability standpoint. You do you want to do chains on the motor? Do you want to refresh the motor? Do you want to put on new hoses or have the wiring done by somebody else? Or do you want to have motor mount kits, or do you want to make your own motor mount kits? There's so many variables to what it would cost to do it. The reality is do you have the passion to follow it through? Is this something you're generally interested in? And do you have the wherewithal to see this project through? And I bet you 95%, 98% of you guys do. I think the only difference is that you might be a little bit scared or unsure if you don't know wiring, or you don't know the mechanicals of an engine, or there's one part of the build that scares you. Don't let that hold you back, because trust me, you'll pass that. You can look at forums, you can watch YouTube videos just like this one. You can reach out to guys like myself, Jay, Christian, ask questions. We'll help you get through that stuff. I think ultimately what ends up being the case is we all want you to feel what we feel like when we build these type of cars. Driving a car like this, knowing that you put your blood, sweat, and tears into it is uncomparable. It's so much fun. It took me 7 episodes to build a car like this. And it is such a good car to drive. It's got power, it's got sound, it's got throttle response. It's got everything you want out of a VR6 swapped car. This is the pinnacle of what we can do. Sure, you can do a bigger 3.2 or 3.6. Ultimately on this channel, I would love to do a 3.6 in the future, something Porsche probably, into a Mark 1, not a Mark 2. But there's something just to be said or to be had about a VR6. An AAA specifically. The sound, something about the Wookiees with the original 2.8 liter VR6 can't be unmatched. Guys, thank you so much for the support. I really do appreciate you hanging in there for this build. It took a while to get to this point, but we're finally here. The build is ready to hit the streets. So thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Until next time, guys, thank you very much. Take care.